This is the YouTube version of the Hidden Experience audio podcast. This show is hosted by Mike Cleland, and that's me, and it is available on most of the popular podcast platforms. Just search out Hidden Experience Audio. And if you want to support the show, you can find it on Patreon, as well as Buy Me a Coffee. This YouTube version has ads, but the audio version is always ad-free. And you can also join my YouTube channel here. And now the show. Audio conversation with Mindy Tautfest, recorded Thursday, February 18th, 2025. I met Mindy at a conference in Kentucky in 2023, and she told me about her near-death experience. And this event is at the core of our conversation. And she wrote a book about what happened, and it is titled Dying to Meet Them, with the subtitle One Woman's Incredible Journey from NDE to UAP. And that book sat on my shelf for almost 2 years. And I finally read it, and I was really impressed at the power of her story. Now, there is no need for me to say much more here. Mindy and I cover a lot in this interview. What I can say is that her experiences, and more importantly, how she integrated them into her life, go way beyond what I would have expected before reading her book and talking to her here in this show. This conversation runs almost an hour and 45 minutes, and I will chime in at the end with a little bit more. Please enjoy. Mindy, I want to thank you so much for saying yes to this interview. It means a lot to me.
Thank you for having me here, Mike.
We met at a conference a little over 2 years ago, and it was a UFO conference, and you kind of said, I have a story to tell. And we sat down together, and you told me a story that didn't have anything to do with UFOs. It was about your near-death experience.
Yeah, I know. We sat up for a couple of hours that night just chit-chatting about all of the intersections between near-death experiences, UFOs, owls, all of these different types of encounters that people can have. And I'll tell you, I fell in love with you and became an instant friend that night.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it meant a lot to me too, because it was people say, why do you go to UFO conferences? And I was like, oh my God, it's like the one place where you can truly be yourself and turn to the person next to you and say, hey, so what brings you here? And they have complete permission to tell you exactly why they are there, where these stories are sort of forbidden in the general population. It's kind of hard to turn to the person next to you at work or the next person next to you on the bus and ask that question and get the kind of answers you might get at a UFO conference. So yeah, it's a really important place for people to connect and share one-on-one in a real environment rather than a virtual environment or, through emails or something.
Right. It's a safe community where, even the strangest things, people understand. You're actually going to run into someone that has had something similar happen or that connects with it somehow. And so it helps normalize it whenever you've been through something so extraordinary and most of the population can't relate. It's so important to find community and to connect with others and to have that vulnerability and be accepted wholly just as you are. It's so important.
Yeah. And some people within the UFO, it's not perfect, right? Some people don't accept someone else's story. We can talk about that a little bit too as we move on. So what I want to cover here is 1, your near-death experience.
Okay.
And then 2, how you got into the UFO research that you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the third thing would be, which is a big part of your book, the third thing is the complex aftermath and the overlap of these two seemingly very different subjects, near-death experience and UFOs. Because to the outsider, that may seem like they don't have any relationship at all. But to the people who are doing either research, whether they're doing near-death or people who've had the direct experience, let me put it that way, wow, does it feel like they're talking? It seems like well, we can get into that, but there's plenty that's in common. But first, yeah. I want to ask you, could you describe, and your near-death experience doesn't fall into the neat, tidy category that other near-death experiences can fall into. So I'll just front-load it there. But it's a really amazing and in the end, really powerful story.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So do you want me to just jump in right there?
Oh, please do. You jump right in there. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, it started back in 2016, November 8th. It was the day of the presidential election. And leading up to this, I was a housewife. We were living out on a 300-acre wheat farm. We had moved back out to my husband's father's farm to kind of help him around because he's getting up there in age and needed some help with some of the chores and stuff. And so we were living out there in the middle of nowhere in northern Oklahoma. And my husband was working as a Southern Baptist minister as well as a teacher at the local school. And he drove the school bus. So our kids were elementary age at the time. And they would load up in the morning with my husband, and I'd see them off, and they'd head on to school. And I would just go about my day there at home. And leading up to this, I had a genetic condition that I was aware of. It was called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it's a genetic connective tissue disorder. But at the time, they had told me that I had the hypermobile form, which is not deadly most of the time. It causes like joint dislocations, a lot of chronic pain, and that's just the very simple explanation of it. But people that have more of the vascular form have, aneurysms and dissections and very deadly side effects from having this condition. And being an ICU nurse leading up to this, I wasn't even familiar with Ehlers-Danlos until I got diagnosed with it. So at that time, I was a housewife. I stayed home. I had a lot of joint pain and migraines and just all the wonderful things that kind of go along with it. And I had stopped working when my kids were born to stay home and help raise them. And so they would go off to school each day once they were in elementary with Dad, and I would stay home and, clean the house and do the things that a housewife does and get dinner prepared. And I had gotten up that morning, and I knew that it was election day. My husband was wanting to go vote after he got home from school with the kids. And so I saw them off, and then I went to go get ready for my day. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw that my face was a little bit swollen on one side. And it was kind of concerning. I thought maybe I was having an allergic reaction. So I took a picture, sent it to my husband, and said, "Hey, my face is swollen. Don't know what's up with that. I'm not in any pain or anything." And so he said, "Why don't you take a Benadryl, go jump in the shower, give it some time to work and see, if it goes down at all. And if not, then call the doctor and, if it's bothering you." And I said, okay. So I went about my day, and by about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I had just come out of the shower, and I went and sat on the couch to start checking to see if there were any early exit polls. And I opened up the front door like I always do and was waiting for John and the kids to come home. And they always would run in and give me hugs and kisses and, Mama, look at what I did today at school and this and that, and tell me all about their day. So I was waiting for that moment. And as I'm sitting there, I have my phone in my hand. I'm looking at the front door open. And that's when I heard the loud explosion in my head. And I knew instantly. I mean, it felt like my skull had kind of blown apart there in the back of my head. And I thought, oh no, this is severe. What's going on? And it was an instant, overwhelming feeling. I could feel it throughout my entire body that, this was something that was deadly. And I say in the book, my first instinct was that I had been shot because there had been coyote hunters out around the area. And I thought, oh goodness, they've shot through this flimsy old trailer house and have shot me in the head. And I tried to direct my consciousness back to that area, and I couldn't feel any blood or anything dripping down. I know it's kind of gross, but I was trying to assess what exactly was going on, from a nursing standpoint and from, just being inside this body that has gone through this immediate trauma. So as I started really dialing into it, I realized I haven't been shot. I thought, okay, they've got this wrong. This is an aneurysm. I must have been at risk of it and just did not understand and know that. And when I had that realization, I felt this, I call it an electrical avalanche that went from the top of my head and it kind of rolled down my body just in a continuous motion all the way down to my feet. And it felt like layers of me were being ripped off. It was excruciating. And as that happened, that's when my head started dropping and I started losing consciousness. I have to specify here because that's the best words that I can put it into is losing consciousness. My body lost consciousness. My consciousness itself did not stop. So I had continuous thought process during the entire encounter to the other side and back, even though my body had gone limp. So my head starts bobbing and immediately I start turning to my religious upbringing and my beliefs and I'm praying, God, please, if I can make it through this, without being maimed or some kind of burden on my family, please, God, let me get through this. And then I'm looking at the door as my head's dropping and I realize my kids are going to walk in here and they're going to be ready to give me hugs and kisses. You see, it's been almost 10 years now, and it still upsets me because it was heartbreaking in that moment to realize my kids are going to come in and find me dead. And I just begged God, please don't let them find me. And I'm thinking, well, then it's going to be my husband. And John is so tenderhearted. He would never get over it either. And so I'm just in deep, deep sorrow and deep prayer, knowing that I'm in serious trouble here. I'm all alone, out in the middle of nowhere. And, I couldn't grab my phone or anything at that time. I had fallen limp. And as I'm in this deep prayer, I stop eventually. And when I did, that's whenever I started looking around and I realized I'm in darkness. And I thought, okay, this is different. So my first instinct was to put my hand out in front of me. And so that's what you see on the book, on the cover there, is that hand in the darkness. And that's literally what I did, was put my hand out to look and see, could I see it? And when I couldn't, my next instinct was to start clapping. So I'm over there on the other side clapping. And that was whenever it finally really sunk in, I don't have any form. I'm literally just my thoughts floating here in the darkness. I've completely crossed over. And so I'm trying to grapple with that. And I'm not scared at that point. Nothing was threatening to me. And I was more just curious, trying to figure out, where am I? And I'm trying to think through my religious beliefs and what's going to come next. So I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for my loved ones to come greet me. I'm waiting for Jesus to show up. I'm waiting for maybe the tunnel of light. And I'm expectant and hopeful. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to face judgment right now. So I'm kind of gearing up for that. And as time has passed, I'm, still praying for my kids and my family. God, if they found me, be their comfort and, shield them from the trauma of this. And I'm still trying to prepare mentally for standing in front of God and being judged. And as time went on, that's when I started getting more and more worried and more distressed, because I thought, something's wrong. I had been raised to believe that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, and that wasn't happening. And I did not have anywhere in my knowledge base of a dark place. I called it the dark abyss. And I felt so alone because no one was there to comfort me. No one was coming for me. And I thought, my God, what have I done? why am I forsaken? You've cast me out into this darkness by myself, and I don't understand. And so I'm begging, Jesus, be my righteousness. I've done something. I don't know. I don't understand this. And so that's how the distress started really building. It wasn't the area itself, which most people refer to it as the void.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the void itself that was distressing. It was my reaction and my own thoughts and my own consciousness. And one of the things I need to interject here is that with that consciousness, when you're not encased in this flesh that we have, over there, my consciousness and my thoughts and my every feeling was so expanded beyond what I had ever experienced in human form. So, I mean, it made up the entirety of my being, was my every thought and feeling and memory. So there was nothing to kind of contain it. So while my distress was building, it was building to such a level that I had never experienced before in human form. It's like I said, it's hard to put into words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I was so heartbroken that I started kind of looking over my life. And a lot of near-death experiencers will say that they have a life review where they're actually shown moments from their life. Mine wasn't like that. Mine was more of an inner searching and looking back at my actions and my motivations in life and how I had treated others and trying to understand what would have separated me out from going to heaven like I had always believed. And as I sat there in this state of really deep reflection, I started realizing, look, you've loved others. You've supported others. You've had that within your being. It's the lack of loving yourself that's really held you back. And I've had some people say, oh, well, she's speaking of ego. And I want to clarify, it's not ego. Nothing to do with ego. It's exactly opposite of that. I had always thought being humble was more of, self-depreciation almost, but it had affected me so much in my life that I was not able to do the things that I was supposed to be doing and, connecting with the people I was supposed to be connecting with. I loved people, but I didn't love myself to love them properly, if that makes sense. And at that realization is when everything turned. That's whenever I felt a presence come up over my left shoulder. And it was very definitely male, but I couldn't identify it as being human or any kind of deity or anything like that. But it was a very definite male presence. And whenever he came up behind me, it was, I call it a hesitant kindness or a sterile kindness. It was like he approached me because he saw the level of my distress, but he wasn't warm and comforting either. So he was just very matter of fact and like he knew me. And he said, look, you're not going to be here forever. And I thought, okay, I've got to trust this guy because there's someone here at least. And he seems to know what's going on. And I thought, okay, someone's here and I'm not going to be here forever if he's to be trusted. And immediately after he said that, and whenever he said this to me, it was a transfer of almost his thoughts to my thoughts from within my spectrum of being from his. So like his being almost transferred, almost like telepathy, but it's different. It was like his intentions and thoughts merged into mine. And so I instantly knew what he was putting out towards me. And anything that I was responding was instantly going back to him. So that's kind of how we communicated. And so when he told me, you're not going to be here forever, we started sailing off to the left. And this is where I start seeing a big purple glow in the distance. And as I'm getting closer and closer to it, I start seeing these intersecting lines that look like almost like a spider web or something. I describe it as a nebula or a map of brain neurons. And if you've ever seen a comparison of like the cosmic web and a map of brain neurons, they completely mimic what I saw. And I didn't come across those images, especially the cosmic web, until maybe 2-3 years later after my NDE. And I said, oh my God, that's it. That's what I saw. But what I was told from him was that that's the fabric of humanity. And as we got closer, it was like he let me just hang in front of it and take it in. And as I did, it just radiated like beauty and goodness and love. And it was incredible. And you hear like some music, like 432 hertz music. There's a one that's very specific that I have in my slideshows whenever I give a talk about my book. And it evokes the exact same feeling on a much smaller scale. But when I first heard that, it immediately put me back in front of that fabric of humanity. It was a small piece of what I felt. And I didn't hear any sound coming off of the fabric of humanity. It was just that vibration that it was, hitting my spirit with. And after we took that in for a moment, he knew I wanted to go to it. And he said, no, it's not for you. And we continued to sail off to the left. And as we did, boom, I was inserted back into my body. And it wasn't, I've talked to some that say that they entered back through their mouth. I was more slammed back into my body. And as soon as I was, it was a vroom, like a computer rebooting. Remember when we used to have the big computer towers and stuff? And it was almost like my body and my spirit and my mind and everything were coming back together and rebooting. And as it did, I could start hearing, the TV in the background kind of muffled. My head was ringing so loud and I was in incredible pain. And when I woke up, I was slumped over on the couch, laying on my right side. And I kept trying to push up to sit up, but I kept falling because I had had a stroke during the aneurysm. Come to find out, what I had was a vertebral artery dissection, which is one of the main arteries that goes up the back of your neck into your brain. And it had blown out in 2 places there. Major chunks came out of it. And so in saving my life, it clotted off, thank God. But it also caused stroke. So it's almost like an aneurysm / stroke all in one. So I had a massive stroke. My arm was hanging limp. I was drooling, my right side of my face was hanging. And I reached for my phone and I was able to call my father-in-law, he was right in the field right in front of us. So, within 30, 45 seconds, he's standing in my living room because he could hear my voice. I couldn't even talk. I was just slurring, trying to say 911, and he heard it. And within about 5-10 minutes after that, John and the kids came home. And they loaded me up in the family car and drove me to the hospital about 30 miles away. And I go in the book and, the next 2 years of suffering that I really went through with the lack of medical care, the small town hospital just ill-equipped to handle that level of trauma or even identify it. They kept sending me home saying I had migraines. So it took finally selling our home on the farm and moving back into Oklahoma City near, major hospitals. And within 2 weeks, they had me in and said, my God, how did you survive this? So it's really been amazing that I was able to survive and actually thrive on this side of what I went through. But man, I needed that experience so much to wake me up and put me on the right path. And so I'm grateful for it today. What was once the worst thing that I had ever been through took me years to work through the trauma of it. But now I can extend that compassion to others on such a scale that I never would have been able to before.
And that part of the book, the aftermath of the NDE, was emotional and really rough in points for a few reasons. I mean, your misdiagnosis and slowly coming back to full health.
Yeah.
As well as the weight of the... So here's a question. How long was it before you told your husband what happened in the void or on the other side?
Well, it was during the pandemic that this actually happened. It was a couple.
That's like 4 years.
Well, it was a couple of years, and I had kept it to myself. We had talked about some of this phenomena. I kind of was a little more loose in my beliefs than my husband was, but you can't help who you fall in love with. When I met my husband, we knew each other for about 2 weeks before we were engaged, moved in, and by the end of the year, we were, married and pregnant. And there is my human right there. It was instant. But I also had to try to figure out how to be a pastor's wife and everything. And we were talking before we started this interview about, some of my environment that I grew up in and the communities that I love dearly that aren't necessarily accepted by fundamentalist churches. And it wasn't that I turned my back on those communities, but I was trying to figure out how to live in both worlds, So even my paranormal background, I talk about, in chapter 6, all of the things. That's why I met up with my husband, was to talk about the shadow people and try to understand it from a biblical perspective. I was, trying to find answers that made sense in everything that I knew and everything that I experienced with everything that I had been taught. And I'm sure a lot of people go through that process in life. I mean, I think it's kind of a continuous process where you're trying to integrate what your experiences tell you and what the world tells you and what the church tells you. You're trying to integrate all of these into a way that makes sense for you. And that was something that I struggled with because I knew that my husband didn't necessarily believe in near-death experiences, and we talked about it. And, his argument was, well, man's only destined to live once and then you die. So maybe this is tricks of demons. So how do I approach my husband and say, okay, because he's either going to believe me or he's not. So if he doesn't believe me, then, that drives a wedge between us.
Oh, yeah.
If he does believe me, what does that do to his faith? And he's going to have to go through all this process that I've been going through for the last 2 years. And I was really worried about how it would affect him. I was more convinced that he would believe me and would question his beliefs that aren't necessarily set in stone in the Bible, compared to not believing me and driving a wedge between us. My husband knows me. He knows my character. He knows I'm not a liar. And so after about 2 years, I had gone through counseling to deal with kind of the physical side of things.
But it wasn't mental counseling. It was physical counseling.
Well, it was mental, but it was more dealing with the repercussions. I had really bad PTSD anytime the kids would slam a door or something, I would think that I was having another aneurysm. And I had such severe anxiety. It was crippling. And so that's really what I went through counseling with, was trying to be able to integrate back into the community, into the world.
Oh, here's a question. Did you tell the counselor that you had this near-death experience?
Right. So that's what I'm getting to. I did not. The week before everything shut down with like the 2 weeks to kill the curve or whatever it was.
Yeah. Oh, I remember it well. Yeah.
So I had texted her and said, hey, there's something, that I want to talk to you about. And I was going to talk to her about sharing this, the NDE. I wanted to share it with her. And with someone that is outside of it, and then have her help me integrate that into how to even begin that conversation with my husband. And I want people to understand my husband is the most selfless, open, loving, supportive person. He, during the 2 years that I languished on the couch, I literally did nothing. I would lay in bed and just sob loudly, uncontrollably, inconsolably. He would go to work. He was working 2 jobs. He'd come home. He'd cook dinner. He'd help the kids with their homework. Then he would take care of me. He would rub my neck, rub my back. He was incredible during that whole time. And the last thing I wanted to do was be more of a burden on him. And especially with all that we had gone through, with the suffering he watched me go through, it already was hurting our faith in that sense. Not that we didn't have faith, not that we didn't have strong faith, but it was a definite test to us. So to get around to it, I had texted the counselor and said, hey, I want to talk to you. Then everything shut down. And it got to a point where I finally just said, John, I've got to talk to you. I've got to tell you. I died that day, and I didn't go to heaven. And I remember he was standing in the kitchen, cooking, and I'm sitting on the couch, maybe 20 feet away from him. And he said, what? And he immediately just stopped, came in and sat down and said, okay, let's talk about this. And I just let it all out. I told him everything. And I sat there just bawling the entire time. And he said, okay, we're going to figure this out together. And of course, the kids are coming around. They're like, what's going on? I remember them coming around and, because they knew something momentous was being discussed at this point. But John just said, okay, honey, we'll figure this out. And he immediately went on and started looking for communities for near-death experiencers. Let's get some answers. Let's talk to people that have been there that understand these kind of phenomena. And so he went on and found IANDS, and he saw that they had the sharing groups and signed us up for it. And that week we went to our first sharing group. And I kept the camera turned off the entire time because I sat there and ugly cried, But he sat there right there with me and held my hand through it all. And we were able to get through it and start looking through the Bible, to understand things from a different perspective that made sense. So that's kind of how it got to where I finally shared it with him. And it was the best move. I mean, he was so understanding and didn't question me for a moment, never has, and has always been there to support and to help guide and, whatever we can do together to better understand how this fits in with our beliefs.
Wow, there's a lot to say here. One is, I'm fully aware that many marriages do not survive if one person has an NDE. Oftentimes there are profound transformative changes in their personality, in their priorities to the person who's survived the trip to the hereafter. So that's really heartening to hear that. And I'm going to say another thing. I just want to thank you. Your book was so filled with such nice people. Like your mother, you talked about your grandfather, you talked about your husband, the people that you encountered along the way in this journey of yours. It was like you had you call it the void.
Right.
And you struggled with that emptiness. I listened carefully. It sounded very distressing in the loneliness, but I've read the story, I've heard you tell it more than once, and yeah, it's not the pop culture version of the near-death experience. Going into the light, sitting in a garden of wildflowers and meeting your spirit guides, or whatever it might be, your grandparents or some angelic presence or Jesus, I've heard a lot of stories. But so what I want to say is your book is really nice. It has a nice feel to it. This is a sad thing to say in a way. I hadn't read a real book. I'd read Kindle books and I read articles all the time and I listen to books. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, a lot. Uh-huh. But I hadn't sat with a physical book in I don't know how long. And it felt so nice. I had a pencil. I was making tons of notes in the margins. And it's not a long book. It's about 167 pages, and then there's some bibliography type things in the back after that and some resources and such. But it was a very quick read. And there came a point there's about halfway through the book where, whoa, the tempo changed. And it was your coming to terms with the mystical aspect of your experience, as well as searching for other people who've gone through, well, let's say other resources along the way. And so I found that part really fascinating, that what would essentially be the second half of the book. And then along the way, you got into UFO research.
I did. So to pick up, you had mentioned about the marriages that struggle when someone has had a near-death experience, and especially whenever they've had a distressing near-death experience. I think it's something like 80%. I had it quoted in my book.
Oh, wow. That's higher than I would have guessed, but wow, yeah.
Yeah. So whenever John and I had gotten involved with IONS, they were actually training him up to be a leader of one of their sharing groups to help with people that were going through issues with their marriages, because we had come out even stronger in our marriage. And I'm telling you, it's, thanks to my husband, just his incredible ability to take a step back, accept me as I am, where I was, and say, we're going to figure this out together, no matter what comes our way. Let's dig in. Let's do the research. Let's do the work together. And that's what held us together through all of this. He was my rock during the entire thing. And I know I changed a lot, but thankfully, I think I changed for the better. That's one of the things I talk about in the book, is the changes that people do encounter on the other side of things. So after about 2 years it took me to get my health under control. I did end up back in the hospital at one point, and we never really figured out exactly what it was. I don't know if one of the dissections was trying to reopen or what, but my blood pressure fell to like 40/20, and they had put me in the neuro step-down unit there at the hospital. And I told John at that point, this was 2 years after the original one, I told him, I don't know if I can make it through another one of these. If it happens, we have to be prepared. Let's go ahead and start making the funeral arrangements. And this is, Mom has a burial plot over here that we can use for me. And, please have this woman in the kids' lives as someone that would be a strong female presence, and play these songs at the funeral. Just all the things you don't want to talk about in your 30s. But we had to start facing those realities, because I had struggled long and hard. But in John's infinite wisdom, he turns to me and he said, okay, we'll make those, but let's also make the plans for something that you want to do. So what's on the bucket list? What do you want to do in your life? As short as it may be or as long as it may be, what do you want? And I said, I want to go to Roswell.
Wow, yeah.
So I told John that I want to go to Roswell. And so he planned it all out. He went ahead and packed up the kids and, scheduled our hotel. And we went out there for the big festival that they have every year, to mark the occasion of the crash and everything.
And what year would have this been?
This would have been 2019.
Oh my God, that seems like last week. That's so recent. Yeah.
So we went out there. We drove out there, and I'll tell you, I was still nearly passing out every day. My head was still ringing. I don't think that I had gotten my hearing aids by that point. I had lost 90% of my hearing.
Wow.
And from the dissection. And so I do wear hearing aids now, thank God, because I can actually hear what's going on. But I was still struggling very much with my health when we went out there. But I had never been to a UFO conference, and this is something that I had been passionate about and really just in love with the UFO phenomena since I was very young. I was the kid that was riding my bike down to the bookmobile to pick up every book I could on UFOs when I'm like 5, 6, 7 years old. I may not even been able to read. I was looking at the pictures. And,
Me too. I did the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet so. Yeah, I'm sure you did the same thing. I did not watch Sesame Street. I watched Sightings, and I was watching Unsolved Mysteries, and then it would come up with, Unsolved or whatever. And I'm like, okay, we couldn't pause the TV back then, and said just hush everyone so you could sit there and watch about the UFO encounters and stuff. So I was always taken with the UFO phenomena. It was always something that I was so interested in. In my 20s, I got involved in ghost hunting because I didn't know how to get involved in UFOs. And I thought, okay, well, that's like adjacent. And I've had, ghost encounters throughout my life, so might as well get into that.
That's very telling, too, just as someone who's done this kind of work. Like, how many people will begin, oh, by the way, I grew up in a haunted house. That is... That's pretty normal for people to say something to that effect. Well, keep going, please.
Yeah. So anyway, we went out to Roswell, and I had never been to an actual conference before. And so I was giddy. Like, I had no idea that the speakers were set up at tables. You could actually go and talk to them. I was blown away. And so, like, these giants of the UFO community are actually sitting there talking to me, and I'm sitting there trying not to pass out, but I am just, pushing through it because I can't believe that I'm sitting here actually talking with Kathleen Martin, and oh my goodness, Mike, funny enough, this is a little side note. Last week, I got a text message from Daniel Allen Jones, who's down in Texas, and he worked in conjunction with Jim Mars, and he's since taken over Jim Mars's archive. And he texted me, and he said, I was looking back through some of my old interview footage, and I swear, is this you in the background? Oh my gosh, Mike, I was standing right behind him, and he actually got footage of when I was meeting Kathleen Martin and everything changed. That was the moment everything changed for me, because that's when she said, oh, I've started the Experiencer Resource Team with MUFON and you should, get involved. And that's what changed everything. That's the day.
Did you get involved in the Experiencer Research
Resource? Oh, yeah. The Experiencer Resource Team. Yes.
So you went right into the deepest waters. That's not talking about like a little dot in the sky or like burn marks in the farmer's field. That's like...
Right.
You're getting right into the consciousness aspect and the weirdest of the weird. Oh, wow. Okay, so you took the deep dive.
Absolutely. Well, that day, after we left the conference, we were on our way home back to Oklahoma, and we had a nice long drive, so I started looking up stuff about MUFON, contacted them, and the director of investigations at the time was Doug Wilson. And he was like, well, I know you said you want to attend meetings, but I'll do you one better. Do you want to be an investigator? And I said, absolutely. And knowing that most of it was done online, that I could do most of it from my computer, I didn't have to worry about my health and stuff. I could work on it as I wanted to. It was a dream come true. And I did. I jumped in with both feet. And within a year, I was state director. And then within a year after that, I was director of training and created with Terry Lynn Keel, who's a very good friend of mine. She was on the board of directors at MUFON. And together, we created MUFON University to actually train investigators how to investigate UFO cases. And so on top of that, I was also part of the Experiencer Research Team, or Resource Team. They changed it halfway through, working with George Medich. And Kathleen had just become emeritus and had turned it over to George. And I learned so much from such incredible people. But that's where things really started clicking for me as I was talking with these abductees. People that had had very detailed encounters with these non-human intelligence. And with every person that I spoke to, they were sounding more and more like myself. And I'm thinking, my goodness, am I just imagining things here, or is this really something that's happening? If it is, then someone else smarter than me has come across this or thought these thoughts before. So that's where I jump on and I start researching, and I found Dr. Kenneth Ring,
Sure.
who I mentioned prominently in the book. And he's since become a very dear friend.
Oh, good, good. Oh, that's because he sort of dropped out of the community, but that's so great because I know he's still around, and I've been tempted to reach out to him, but I never have. So that's great to know.
He and I, we communicate on email. He's getting up there in age, and he always says, "My dearest Mindy, much love, Ken." And every time that he writes, he is so dear. He is has such a spirit about him, and you can tell that he has done exactly what he was meant to do in life in working with near-death experiencers. He's incredible, and the community owes him a huge debt of gratitude.
Both communities. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what he had done, he was the professor of, I'm blanking on it. What was it?
He was a psychology professor, wasn't he?
Yes, thank you. So Dr. Ring was the professor of psychology out at the University of Connecticut. And in the early 90s, he was doing research on near-death experiencers. He had actually teamed up with Dr. Grayson, Bruce Grayson, all the big names in near-death community. They all got together and they formed IONS. Well, he had done some investigations into commonalities between near-death experiencers. And one day, one of his colleagues came to him and brought him a copy of Communion by Whitley Strieber and said, "You need to read this because this guy sounds like your near-death experiencers." And Dr. Ring said, "No, I don't do UFOs, but I'll humor you and I'll go ahead and read it." Well, funny enough, I had been reading through Whitley Strieber's Communion, and I had, circled things and, put big exclamation points next to it and going, his description of his encounter with this non-human intelligence that encompassed him. I quote it there in the book because that jumped out at me. He said, it encircled me and it encompassed me. And his whole description of it was exactly my description on the other side of just being encompassed by this intelligence. I mean, I literally was standing in front of God. I was surrounded by God, and the spark right before things come into being. And it was something that lasted, from beginning of time through the end of time through infinity. It encompassed everything that ever was and ever is or ever will be. And he was giving those same vibes in what he was describing with his UFO encounter. And I thought, oh my gosh, there is something to this. And then to find out that Dr. Ring said, okay, I'm going to look more into this because of reading that same book and understanding the near-death experience on such a level as he did and as I did, being an experiencer, and then hearing an experiencer in the UFO community sounding like that, adding to that with all of the other experiencers I had been talking to, I can understand why Dr. Ring then lined out the Omega Project and put it together. And so what he did was he formed a line of questioning for UFO experiencers and near-death experiencers, and then those that were just kind of interested in the topics, and then people that weren't experiencers at all, to kind of differentiate between some of the commonalities that we were finding within things. And what he came to was two main conclusions, which was the encounter-prone personality, which he said was people that were able to dissociate almost to the point of exclusion of their environment. So these people from a very young age had learned how to turn inwards and to connect with whether that's other beings or other realms. There was an internal connection there where they were fully absorbed in it. And I talk in my book about how I learned how to do that. And I didn't even know that that's what I was doing. I was almost meditating into, getting myself into a meditative state where I was in contact with other realms. And it was due to my genetic condition and the pain. No one knew I was dislocating my hips and my shoulders and my ankles and stuff. It was more, I'm Gen X. So our parents were like, suck it up, cupcake,
So yeah, I'm a boomer. And that was,
Okay, so you understand. Suck it up. I'm much older than you, honey. You just wait until you're an adult. And, and here I am, as a young child in severe pain. And but no one knew. They didn't know to be concerned. And so I had to learn how to turn within myself and, soothe myself. And that's how I did it. So I think that's what started me off. Having that encounter-prone personality and set off my lifelong journey of being an experiencer of all kinds of phenomena. Like I said, with the Hat Man, shadow people, spirit.
Oh, that part of the book was wonderful, and I just was kind of like, I just turned the page, like, not again, another paranormal thing is happening to you. And you saw UFO too, didn't you?
I have seen things. I have never seen a UFO up close. I've seen things in the sky. I have, that were unexplained. In fact, we just recently took a cruise for Christmas, and I have video of these lights hovering over the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America or whatever you want to call it while we were out there in the open ocean. And I have one of my friends looking into it right now because I have the exact position and everything of it. So I've had things like that. I don't have any, full memories of being abducted. I do have memories as a child of flying, of being pulled through my window.
Ooh.
Yeah, and seeing the house and then the neighborhood, kind of fading beneath me as I continue to rise. So I have memories like that, which hint at probably I've had some encounters, but none that I am consciously aware of.
As the years go on, I do not cling to the name or the vocabulary word abduction. Like, I think that there's a much more subtle set of experiences, and I don't want to, I think you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
I used to say there's a lower tier on the ladder, but I don't like that because that means the upper tier of the ladder is maybe more important than the lower tier of the ladder.
Right.
So I don't use that way to say it anymore, but there is a set of experiences that invade people's lives in a way, and I have to be at peace. I'll ask the questions like, "Oh, have you ever seen a UFO? Do you have this kind of thing?" And then if they don't say, then I mean, it doesn't mean I try to treat the implications of the story. I try to treat everyone equally. Everyone's on the same playing field.
Absolutely.
And I'm going into whether people have had an owl experience or people have had a powerful synchronicity. Or people had a close-up UFO sighting. I treat all of those differently. I'm starting to get into, I've interviewed a bunch of near-death experiencers. What's happened is I've actually interviewed a lot of people who've had UFO contact, and then they say, oh, by the way, I had a near-death experience in my youth.
Absolutely. That was one of the things that I also talk about in the book is Kathleen Martin had actually done a study where she found that 55% of experiencers, UFO experiencers, have had a near-death experience.
Wow, I'll say 55% of the general public hasn't had a near-death experience. In
the general public, it's more like 5%, which is still millions of people. But why is it, 55% in the UFO community? And amongst those of us that are researchers that have really gone all in and really dedicate our lives to the phenomena, I would say it's more like 85%, 90%. Almost every one of my very close friends in the UFO community who is doing profound research has had a near-death experience of some sort in their past. Why?
So... yeah, this is fascinating, and the same thing. The near-death experience, to some researchers and maybe to the general public, has a definition where, let's say, you would have to have been on the operating table, and someone would have to see you flatline,
right,
and you'd be gone for a while, and then maybe they resuscitate you, or the heart starts beating again. But some people have had experiences where they're put into a medically induced coma. They're alive, but they have the near-death experience.
Absolutely.
That would be, Eben Alexander has that amazing, powerful book, Proof of Heaven, but he was never physically dead. And there's so many variables in that. I talked to a guy who was a pilot in the Air Force. I think I've got this right. And there was a landing. When they landed, the aircraft was suddenly vaulted crooked and started going sideways across the grass and then across the landing strip next to him, and then, on and on. And it so for just an instant, he said time stopped. Like everything went in ultra slow motion. And he had what amounted to a near-death experience just from the momentary shock of like death is imminent.
Wow.
And then he had all the powerful after effects.
Right.
Like this profound change in his personality, profound mystical experiences, literally like, the bedroom wall opening up and being engulfed with spirits of love.
Wow.
And this is from, just what would have probably been a few seconds in real life time of what may have been a terrible disaster, which everyone was fine. The plane eventually just coasted to a stop.
Right.
But his experiences are just mind-boggling. So I guess we're both wrestling with the same question. Here, I'm going to, you talk about Ray Hernandez in your book and his studies for free.
Right.
And I know he did a similar, he crunched the numbers as far as how many people have had a near-death experience, and then how many people have also had the UFO contact experience.
Yeah.
And he says the free organization is not like a UFO reporting site. It's not a UFO site. It's
right.
people who have had consciousness experiences. It's a study of consciousness. So he's really backed away from the word UFO, though he's certainly, that's the experiencer is having interactions with what he would call a non-human intelligence.
Right.
Oh, do you know his story, how he got started? I just want to share this with you because it's so great. Do you know Ray? Have you met Ray or anything? Or?
I actually, chapter 6 of my book, I wrote, that's what started my book. I wrote that for Ray's book. And so chapter 6 of my book is actually in his book.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. You didn't say that clearly in the, okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what kind of kicked off me writing the entire thing. And that's why chapter 6 kind of has a different vibe to it, because it's, has all the fun little encounters and stuff that I had throughout my life. And that fits under the encounter-prone personality. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's about halfway. It's almost halfway through, almost exactly halfway through the book. Remember I said earlier, I'm halfway through your book. It totally changes. I was like, whoa, here we go. So how funny. That's Ray. I know Ray pretty well. So do you know his story? How he how he got the modalities?
Yeah. It was something with his dog, wasn't it? In his house?
No, he had an experience of his dog. That was like basically he saw this glowing, floating plasma, and his dog but they were supposed to put his dog down that day. And then there was a floating plasma, and then the dog was like, this old dog was running around like a little puppy, and the dog lived for years after that. It was a miracle. I mean, it was like a biblical miracle that took place with his cute little dog that him and his wife loved dearly. So he has a story. This would have been after he started getting involved into the UFO research. So two things happened simultaneously. He got involved with UFO research, and then he compulsively started reading near-death experience research. He had this one day where it was just, he met like 5 people. I might be exaggerating and saying this all wrong, but he had a day or a series of days where he couldn't have a conversation with someone without them saying like, oh, I had a near-death experience. Then he said, you know what happened? He told his dad like, oh, wow, I've been talking to all these people who have like claimed to have died and had this exalted experience. And his dad said, oh, I had that experience when I had my heart surgery. His father said, and this I got to be careful because I might be getting this wrong. His father said, I lived my whole life over.
Wow.
I was unconscious. I lived 60 years. I was like, my experience was 60 years long. I lived my entire life again.
Wow.
So Ray was driving down, this is somewhere in the aftermath, before starting the organization Free, which has since been called the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraordinary Experiences. I think I got that right.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And so he's driving down, and I actually wrote this down because I wanted to tell this story. He's in Miami traffic. He was living in Miami. I think he was listening to NPR. He's making a left turn. The radio's playing, and all of a sudden, whoosh, he's gone. He's like vaulted into some other totally different reality. And he has this incredibly cinematic, powerful visionary experience of seeing what amounts to a giant Ferris wheel, like a big turning iron wheel with these giant spokes. And it's enormous. And he's like he's got a vantage point where he can see one spoke past and it says, UFO contact. And then it moves past and the next one says, out of body experience. And the next one says, the near death experience. So this goes on. And I got them listed here. Lucid dreams, mystical meditation, remote viewing, shamanic journeys, channeling, spirits and ghosts. All of these arms say that. And then his vantage point kind of zooms in on the center point, the axle that holds all these spokes together. The core axle is labeled human consciousness. And then whoosh, he's back in traffic and the radio's still playing.
So that's what's on the front of his book.
That's the wheel. It looks like the wheel, and each little spoke of that wheel is labeled.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I didn't know that that's how he got that image.
And he said I was gone for 20 minutes, but it was no time at all. He was gone mid left turn in traffic. He has this experience.
Wow.
And I love that list because I'm like seeing all those things.
Uh-huh.
So here I'm going to jump around. Forgive me. You also talk about the gateway experience in Robert Monroe and the early stages of the military trained remote viewers going back to the early 70s,
right?
Including Joe McMoneagle.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I can't remember how recently, Jacques Vallée did a public talk. And he said, I was brought into the remote viewing partially because I had a knowledge of UFOs. And the people involved in the remote viewing process realized that some of the members had UFO contact. So they brought me in and I interviewed them. He said every person doing remote viewing in the first core group for the military, every single one of those people had what he would call a close encounter of the third kind. And then Jim Marrs went and interviewed all these people for a book he was doing. That book it took a few years to get that published. It's listed as a book called Psi Spies, PSI Spies.
Okay.
And he said, I asked him, well, how many people would have had UFO contact in that list? Because it's my understanding that some of them have. I mean, Joe McMonagle's been very open. Joe McMoneagle had a close-up UFO sighting as well as a near-death experience.
Wow. And
he's like remote viewer number one.
Yep.
Considered one of the best remote viewers. So I asked Jim Marrs, how many people had the UFO contact? And he said, all of them.
Oh, wow.
So there's this mystery. This is a complex mystery.
Right.
And I think if one person sits alone and just only studies UFOs, and one person only sits alone somewhere and studies the near-death experience,
they're missing it.
Something much richer and much more complex is taking place that has a core hub somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that was part of my conclusion, was that we're dealing with at least part of the UFO phenomena is related to interdimensional beings, I believe. Because whenever I came across the gateway process and the analysis and assessment of gateway process that they were doing, they talked about sending consciousness over into the absolute. So they would use the hemisync technology that was developed by the Monroe Institute.
Can I interrupt? I'm going to say something.
Okay.
When I read that about the hemisync thing, I have earbuds and sometimes I listen and read, and I have a hemisync audio. And I was listening to hemisync audio
when you were reading it.
When I read your line about so I'm very well versed in the hemisync and Robert Monroe.
That's hilarious. You were like, uh-oh.
So that's totally normal for me at this point. Yeah. So, keep going, please.
So they were using the hemisync that was developed by the Monroe Institute to train these soldiers to send their consciousness over into what they called the absolute. And they go very much in depth in that whole document about what the absolute is. And as you read it, if you've read, chapter 1 and 2 of my book, then you can go back and go, this sounds a lot like the void and the endlessness of it, and, the absence of structure or construct, anything over there, absence of time. It was, things move forward in a progressive fashion. I mean, I can go through my whole encounter over on the other side and say, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But time was existing all at the same time. And so I don't know how to explain that.
Nobody does. You can't explain it. It's like, it's not our world. It's like outside the boundaries of our world. Yeah.
Right. But so they were sending soldiers over to make contact with non-human intelligence, which is like who I encountered over my left shoulder in the void. They're contacting the non-human intelligence over in the absolute. And I believe that the more that we know how to get there, the easier it is to get there. So I believe that I'm still entangled some with that other area. And I can go back. When I wrote chapter 2 and chapter 9 of my book, I really zoned in and just connected back with that area to make sure that I pulled all of the information I could from it, that from my understanding. And Lord knows I'm not a rocket scientist. I was a nurse, so I have some medical training and stuff, but I'm not up there on genius level. But I can go back and read parts of chapter 9, and I don't necessarily understand it. And I was almost scared to put it out because I was like, okay, this is what I know from what I experienced over there. But what if someone smarter than me looks at it and they're like, nope, this girl is just full of it, or it doesn't make any sense. And that was just my own fear. But I thought, okay, I've got to just put it out there because this is what I know to be true. Well, now I, run the International UFO Bureau, and one of the people that's on our board of directors, he's the former chief of aerospace medicine for NASA. And he read through my book and he said, I can tell you exactly in scientific terms, everything you describe in chapter 9 is absolutely true. And I thought, well, that's amazing because, here's this guy that I look up to majorly, and he can sit there and look through what I wrote just from what I felt and what I brought back from the void, and to be able to explain it scientifically that it all makes sense. So that was such a validation for me. The last thing I want to do is put out, oh, this is my impressions, and then I just look stupid or whatever. But, no one wants to look stupid. But you've got to take that chance because what I put in there is what I knew and what I brought back from that area. In fact, whenever I was about to publish the book, I reached out to Nancy Evans Bush, who was the secretary of IONS, and I had read through her book, and it was the biggest comfort for me. She's actually the one that coined the term distressing near-death experience, and she's really been the champion of those that have had distressing encounters, because most people want to hear the radiant, beautiful, and exuberant encounters that people have, and some of us don't. And that's one of the things that I really would like to get across to the near-death community is those of us that have had distressing encounters, we have a whole nother layer of trauma on top of the trauma of dying. We've had the physical dying.
Yeah.
We've had the trauma of having a near-death experience and understanding so much more about what lies beyond. That's incredible to deal with in itself. But then to have a distressing encounter and the loss of control with it, I didn't put myself into the void that I knew of, but now I can look back and understand the beauty of why I was sent there and the purpose of why I was sent there. I've told others, if I would have gone to heaven, then I would have come back and been like, well, I know where I'm going. I don't need to change a thing.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. But I'm also someone that's riddled with anxiety. And I wish I could say that's gotten better. I have such terrible, social anxiety. I hate being on camera. I don't like being in front of crowds, and I find myself there all the time. So now I'm learning to live with it, and I can kind of control it some. But the anxiety that comes with that, and understanding, that you've gone through this distressing encounter, it's a lot to deal with. That rejection that people feel. And then to come back and try to connect with the community of others that have had a near-death encounter. And there's almost a rejection of those that have had the distressing encounters. It's even more traumatic, So I have always tried to be very open. If other people have had distressing encounters, to be there to talk with them and, just to be an ear to try to process. It's a lot to go through. And Nancy Evans Bush was really the pioneer in stepping forward and being that first voice to say, look, there's something more. There are other types of encounters, and it does not reflect on the person. There have been people that have had 3, 4 different near-death encounters, and one time they go to heaven, one time they'll go to hell, one time they'll go to the void, then they'll go back to heaven. It seems to be what that person needs at the time. If I would have gone to hell with my anxiety, you would have never heard from me again. I would have really lived the rest of my life in fear and complete loathing. But that void was such a neutral encounter and stripped me bare in front of all of creation. They're just the creator, it put me in a unique spot, and it gave me that look at the behind the scenes working. So anyways, whenever I had sent the book to Nancy Evans Bush, she looked through chapter 9 and she said, okay, I looked up to see if you used AI to create this because she's a professor as well. Because she could tell it was different than the rest of the book. And she goes, I heard Mindy all through chapter 1 through 8, but when I got to chapter 9, it's different. And I said, okay, I understand that. It's because it's literally not me writing it. It's literally what came with me from the other side. A lot of this stuff is over my head, and I've just written it as I received it and, came back with it. And she goes, okay, I completely understand. And so she had me put in a little bit in there where it said you might see a shift in tone here. And that way, a reader would understand that's why it's so different. It's because it's literally not me writing it. It's me writing it as it came to me from the void. And so I think there's deep understanding in it that I still need to dig in and better understand. I think my understanding of what I wrote will change as I continue to learn.
Oh, yeah.
Which is incredible to say because I wrote it. I understand chapters 1 through 8 because that came from my experience. Chapter 9 came from my knowing, my innate. I don't even know how to phrase it. It's what came from the void directly to me, what I came back with. So it completely changed my perception of reality. But that's why I think that there's so much connection between these non-human intelligence encounters, near-death experience. I think they're all originating from that other side. Even the ones that may be coming from inner earth, even the ones that may be coming from inner ocean or off-world, they still have a spirit about them that originates with that original place of creation. It all traces back to that, no matter where it is originating from. That is the original origin point. That is the absolute, and that is the void.
The absolute. The absolute. This is, oh my God, there's 10,000 things I could say here. The absolute. So I'm going to write this and I'll get back. But let me ask a couple rapid fire questions here.
Okay.
Because I've been furiously making notes as you're talking.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. Don't you dare apologize. So the void, I wrote before the Big Bang. Would that be, you were kind of hinting to something to that effect. I mean, the Big Bang is like a myth in a way. I mean, science says it happened and who knows?
Right.
It's an unknowable point before the Big Bang. But is that what you're describing or am I reading into it?
I don't believe so. This is outside of the Big Bang. this would be the coding behind what caused the Big Bang, that put all of the things into motion and created the particles to have a Big Bang. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, I think we're dealing with a genuine mystery, and we're stuck here in this 3D world, and so we have to use metaphor, like the coding,
right,
to sort of to describe the unknowable. Sure, that makes as good a sense as anything. Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that, because I was like, is she describing before the Big Bang?
I was going to say that another one of our board members with the Bureau, the International UFO Bureau, is Michelle Miners, and she's in leadership within the Navajo Nation. And so we were speaking about some of these things, and in their tradition, there was a time before where it was darkness, and I go into some of that in my book, where there was none or chaos. Anaximander talks about Aperion. There were all of these times in different traditions that talk about the darkness before, and even within the Christian Bible, there was darkness before God created light.
Yeah.
And so in all of these traditions, we know that before there was darkness. And I believe that that's where I was existing outside of this time.
Great. Yeah, that was beautifully written. And so I was right there, like with that whole chapter there. And so chapter 9 is titled Source Reality, the Gateway Process, and the Cosmic Hologram. So let me hear one more question about the void. This is something I've heard from people who have had near-death experiences. This is something I've heard from people who have been on board the craft. I mean, I've actually heard it from people who've taken like mass doses of mushrooms.
Okay.
They have like a mystical type experience where they knew everything in the universe. Would that be accurate? You talked about tapping into the infinity of all knowledge.
Right. I did not know everything in the universe. Thank God.
Okay. I've talked to people who do, and then they all say the same thing. They say, well, I came back and now I can't tap into it.
No, there was a sense of continuity and connection with everything. But in my book, I talk about, I almost felt like I was put into an invisible box. I was held separate. And that's part of why there was that crushing feeling, because I could feel everything out there around me. I could feel all of creation, and I was separate from all of it.
Oh.
All of it. Now, whenever I sailed off with that intelligence that came to me, I was outside of that. And I think that's why I was able to experience the feeling from the fabric of humanity and everything. I felt more like I was part of it, but I did not take in all of the information or anything. But I couldn't help but be touched by it. You know, if I had to absorb some of it, because I was part of it, but I did not know everything, and I wouldn't want to know everything. I think that would be a lot to take on. The little bit that I came back with and the understanding of the working of it, that was enough for me. And I'm thankful that that was revealed to me. But I think beyond that, there's so much that goes into our existence. I think it'd be too much.
Yeah. Have you read The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot?
I have not.
Yeah, there's a lot of books out there. It's so tough to get. I know I struggle keeping up with all the wonderful information out there.
Yeah.
So he wrote a book about exactly what you're describing, where you described in that chapter. And it's a wonderful book. And he died of cancer in, I think, the late 90s. And that book was written in the mid 90s. And he talked about it a little bit before his death in interviews, but he was working with Bud Hopkins, dealing with his UFO contact experiences. So here's a guy who's dealing with UFO contact experiences. He writes what was a very groundbreaking book at the time called The Holographic Universe, where he argues that our universe is constructed as a hologram. And you could make a very good argument that reality itself is a hologram. And it's a beautiful book. It's a really powerful book. And I read it long before I started looking into the UFO stuff. And it really helped form a way of looking at reality
Right.
that was different than the way I had been looking at it. And the same thing with the simulation theory. They're similar.
Yeah.
And it's one focuses more on a hologram, one focuses more on like let's say a virtual reality computer game.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can have a holographic simulation, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the hologram is you take a hologram, which is, let's say it's a piece of glass,
Mm-hmm.
and you take a hologram of, let's say, of a person standing there. You have a three-dimensional image on this piece of glass and then you smash the glass, and you pick up the one little part of the glass. It doesn't show his pinky, his little finger.
Right.
It shows the entirety of him in the smallest little fractal of that glass. So every little sliver of that glass holds all the information
Right.
of the image itself. So given that model, like you could pull a blade of grass in your lawn, dig deep down into a single molecule in that grass, and it would hold all the information of the universe.
Wow.
So we are all one, the things that people channel and things that say,
Yep.
it bears itself out in this metaphor of the hologram.
Yeah. You had started talking about the 3D glasses, and that's one of the things that I share with people to try to explain how I felt whenever I came back. Part of my reintegration of my mind back into this reality, it took a couple of years, and I struggled with it very much. And the best way that I can kind of describe that to others is if you put on virtual reality headset and you created your character and you launch it and you're walking it through that environment and universe within the virtual reality simulation, but then you get locked into it and you can't remove that virtual reality helmet. And you know that you have a life, you know that you have a job, you have a husband, you have kids.
Oh, you've got to eat food. Yeah, you need to breathe air. Yeah.
Right. So you know that you exist in this, real reality, and then you're locked into a virtual reality. That's very much what I was dealing with, knowing the reality of the void and how I felt pure existence there compared to being back here. And I describe in the book about feeling clunky and heavy, being back in this body when I knew the freedom of just pure consciousness in that pure existence. And so I was happy to be back, but I also struggled with being back because I knew the reality. I knew what pure reality looks like, and I had tasted it. Now I'm back here. So it'd be very much akin to being locked into a virtual reality environment and not being able to get back to your life here on Earth. And you're trying to tell people in there, hey, I exist outside of here, and you sound like a lunatic. And people are like, what? All there is, the Sims or whatever, whatever we're living in this VR. And you're going, no, there's more. There's more. So that was the sense that I had for a long time, probably about 2 years. And I still would struggle with it years after that, from time to time, that I would be connecting back with that area. And I'm like, man, I feel heavy and clunky back here in this reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that many times. So the implication is, in that other reality, you live in as a non-physical form.
Right.
You live as a spark of light or an infinite blob of energy. It's hard for us to wrap our mind around it because we're trapped here in this world.
The way that I describe it is I felt like a puff of dandelion. That's the best I held that essence of me, but it was almost like it was extended, it was puffed out and it was wispy and it was connected to others. If you put two dandelion puffs, they can entangle.
Mm-hmm.
That's very much how I felt. I can't say I look like that. I have no idea what I look like on the other side, but that's how I felt. And I actually drew up a really pretty tattoo that I plan on getting with the dandelion emerging from the void to kind of symbolize what I went through. But that's always been kind of what has stuck with me, is that if I was this puff of dandelion light. That's, kind of how I felt.
I've talked to many people and they say something, well, they're trying to describe the indescribable in a way, but they'll say, it feels like, well, the one person in particular, it feels like we are on the flat movie screen, this reality.
Right.
And that reality is more real than our flat reality. It's very common for people to say, I hear this a lot, it was more real than real.
Yep. Yeah.
And so our existence here is somehow limited and flat.
Right.
And that existence there is richer and more infinite. And simple things like, well, that's not simple at all, but like complex things for us to try to wrap our minds around, like the absence of linear time.
Right.
And the absence of a physical body. Yeah. And I mean, in some ways that's heaven. In some ways that's, we have vocabulary words that touch at these things, but it's really hard to capture them for us.
Right. Well, I think that whenever I go back there, when my time comes, if I pass back through the void, I don't think that I'll have that same distress, because I'm thankful for that, to have had that little taste of it, that if I do encounter it again, I will make a journey over there again. Obviously, all of us will.
Well, it's a one-way road for all of us, yeah.
Yeah. But if I pass through that void again, I won't have that same distress, and I can understand, I can look at it without that fear and understand that it doesn't mean me any harm, and just enjoy it. I think that it's an honor to be here on this earth and to be having a human experience. Even though we go through hard times, we learn and we grow because of it, and we love because of it. And that's one of the things I was touching on earlier with the two things that Dr. Ring had come out with, was the encounter-prone personality, and then the set of after effects where people become much more spiritual and much more altruistic and much more understanding. And, they change in such ways that is so open, and they appear younger, which is wonderful. There's so many things that it affects within people whenever they've had these kind of encounters. And I can say all of the changes I've encountered have been all for the better. Thank God. And I know some people struggle heavily with it, especially people that have had positive encounters. They struggle with wanting to go back. Mm-hmm. One of the side effects of mine was I wasn't ready to go back there. I was scared to go back because I had been so traumatized until I could really break it down and understand it.
There's a term which I love that a near-death experiencer shared with me, the trauma of enlightenment.
Wow, that's beautiful and perfect.
And I think that the UFO contactee or the UFO experiencer might not be the right word, but I guess if you are confronted with it's a very individual process because you're having the experience
right
within your own consciousness. So like I feel like I have a formal, concrete knowing.
Absolutely.
That there is a parallel reality that interacts with our reality.
Yep.
I call it a deeper reality. There's all kinds of words I could use. And it is the source of, let's say, just something simple like synchronicities. Mm-hmm. And it feels like that whole list on Ray Hernandez's wheel, all those spokes, every single one of them would factor into this reality. There's another reality that is interacting with ours. We can occasionally get a glimpse into it. Occasionally we'll have a UFO sighting. Somebody who's meditating in a monastery in Tibet can occasionally tap into this. Someone who has a near-death experience will momentarily visit this other parallel realm. But what our modern world, I think this would be absolutely normal. If I told this to someone in the jungles of Brazil, they would look at me like everyone knows this. But if I told it to like a materialist scientist in the halls of Harvard, maybe not so much now. But if in an engineering lab, if I told this to someone, they would say, oh, no. Like, that's like the reality doesn't work that way. It's just the here and now, just the material stuff. If we can't kick the tires, it doesn't exist. and I'm like, oh no, but from my direct experience. So I feel like there is a population of UFO experiencers, of near-death experiences, of people who have had all kinds of powerful experiences that are in our society right now who have the direct experience of like, like it's much richer, much more complex, much more rewarding. I'm very cautious to say that it's like, I don't want to sugarcoat it. I don't want to sound like it's unicorns and rainbows, but I would say that it has it's hopeful.
Yes.
At the very least, I can say it's hopeful. Like, because I've talked to people who've had negative UFO stories, and I've talked to people who have had positive UFO stories, and I'm very empathetic. And boy, when someone tells me a story, like, I just get sucked right into it. I feel it.
Yeah.
And if someone tells me a scary, frightening UFO abduction story, like, wow, I'm swallowed up in the power of their emotions. Someone tells me their angelic, blissful experience of being, in this exalted heavenly realm with their UFO spirit guides, I'm right there with them too. I have the same connection to their story.
Yeah.
And I felt it very strongly with yours too. And yours was a different kind of journey because you were struggling deeply with the void and the mystery of the void. And then to come back and then to struggle deeply with the challenges of integrating that in your own life. And to have it be ultimately rewarding it made for a wonderful book.
Well, thank you. I think that probably the most important thing to come out of it was to understand, to be there for others that have gone through these kind of traumas. It's already hard enough to talk about some things that are outside of the norm with UFO encounters or near-death experiences. So many don't believe, and they kind of look at you like you're crazy. But those that have been through it, we've got to be there for each other. And especially the ones that have had traumatizing events to help process it and just be a listening ear. So that's what so many are trying to do right now within the community, is kind of change the narrative. I know that it's moved from abductee to experiencer and trying to take away that negative connotation. But there are those that have had distressing encounters, and it really needs to be handled very delicately by those that understand and can connect. It's why it's so important to have community and find your people that will listen. So,
in the core of my research is this owl stuff. So I'm talking to people who've had like powerful mystical experiences with owls, and people reach out to me and I get back to them, and oftentimes I talk on the phone. A lot of it is over email, but so people have a experience with an owl that's so strange and so fantastical that it doesn't fit into their normal reality.
Right.
Oftentimes after someone dies, they'll have like a powerful owl experience, and it'll be magical, but then they'll be like, well, what does this mean? And they'll contact me and they'll basically say like, have you heard this story before? And I'm like, all the time. Like, this is so normal. The story you just told me, I have heard countless times. You are not alone. And that alone, just that alone, to be able to say like, you are not alone.
That's it.
Other people have had these experiences is 95% of what they need to hear.
That's it. Just a listening ear, and hey, I understand. I'm there with you. I believe you. I'll tell you, Dr. Ring, one of the conclusions he came to was he thought that people that have had these kinds of encounters are part of an Omega prototype. And you may want to go back and get Dr. Ring's book, The Omega Project, if you're...
I have it. Oh, yeah, I have it, yeah.
Okay, good. I should have known you would.
I haven't read the whole thing. I'm terrible. Sometimes I cherry pick and, jump around, so yeah.
Turn to the end of it. He talks about the Omega prototype, and he believes that those of us that have had these kind of profound encounters have almost gone on a type of shamanistic journey, and that it is awakening a new understanding and connection. One of the things that our youngest generations, like my kids are Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they are so supportive of each other, even to a fault. I mean, they will defend and protect it. They'll make fun of each other to no end as well. They make fun of me all the time, keep me humble. But they are also fiercely, supportive of each other in every way. And I can only hope that continues, where there is an acceptance of people just as they are, and meeting people where they are, and just bringing back that humanity, loss of judgment. Yes, we have to hold people to general standards that are acceptable by society, but to accept people just as they are, that goes a long way. And I think we've lost some of that. And so I'm wondering what the next generation of experiencers will bring. If we've seen any kind of differences throughout the generations. We know that, what people were talking back in the 50s and 60s, and they were seeing, saucers land and everything. But I think that as time has gone on and we have become more open to discussing these kind of experiences amongst ourselves, we've learned so much more. And I can only imagine what this next generation's going to bring with their encounters, and what more may be revealed to them through near-death experiences and non-human intelligence contact. It'll be exciting to watch.
And we're I'll say you, and I'll include myself in this, and I, through books and podcasts and speaking about my own direct experience, I haven't had a whole lot of pushback.
Right.
I mean, I've told some pretty weird stories.
Yeah.
And I haven't had very much pushback at all.
Myself as well, yeah.
And I think you turn the clock back 20 years. I mean, Whitley's book came out almost 40 years ago.
Yeah.
He was vilified, and those days are over.
Yeah. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, I'm glad that I didn't have to go through what he went through. I wouldn't have come forward if Whitley hadn't come forward and
paved the way.
Like, I don't know if I would have. So, and then the next generation of people coming forward will have it be easier. And so there's going to be a point when it's just well understood and accepted. And I think that's the whole disclosure thing is happening concurrent with millions of individual experiences and millions of individual stories. And so people need to share that.
That's it.
Hey, I asked you to have a book handy, and could you read a little passage?
Okay.
Yeah, at page 109, the last paragraph begins, "We had become more accepting."
Okay. You want me to read that whole last paragraph?
Just right to the bottom of the page. Yes, please.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why at the end. So
okay. We had become more accepting and forgiving of others, and even more so, more forgiving of ourselves with every passing day. Our children were able to begin opening up to us about their own struggles. They were growing secure in the knowledge that we would fully accept them as they were, something which may not have happened if we had held tightly to our previous belief system. We were now able to speak with each other more openly about our feelings without reserve of fear or of being looked down upon. While most of the NDE after effects had only affected me, this move towards a more spiritual mindset, as opposed to one of any one organized religion, was one of the most significant transformations we experienced together as a family. Over the years following my experience, we have each grown spiritually stronger and more assured of the importance and miracle of our existence, which no doubt continues after this life.
I cried when I read that part of the book.
Wow.
And so this isn't, you don't say I in this, you might say it a little bit in this paragraph, you say we. This is like you had an experience on your couch, you died, entered the void, came back, and then you write, we as a family changed.
Yeah.
And are more accepting and transformed because of, like, it was a collective experience, like, that was really powerful. It's just really beautiful. And so that paragraph was the life lesson of this book. Yes, you wrote beautifully about research that other people had done about the fabric of reality, but what I was touched by was the very human story.
The transformation.
I want to thank you so much for being that vulnerable and being that open with what you've experienced. And the aftermath, not just the experience itself, but the aftermath.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was one of the really amazing things with being able to open up, having that support from my husband and being that vulnerable with my family to be able to share what I went through and to try to understand things together. It completely changed the way that we operated as a family, and we're so open. And I don't think there's much that we don't discuss now. But we understand each other. And I think after, you might even say it's a little bit of a trauma bond, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
After all that we went through. And my children are so strong. You know, they're teenagers now and they're moving on and doing wonderful things out in the world. And I couldn't be more proud of them. And I think that being able to see me struggle and then come back from that and do the things I'm able to do now to try to turn something that was so negative, the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life, and being able to learn from it and grow from it and, thank God, physically heal from it. And to now be able to do what I'm doing now, working with experiencers and trying to understand the phenomena on a whole different scale. Hopefully it's inspired them to not hold back in life and to chase their dreams, really. There's so much that we were able to learn during those first critical years after I first opened up. And I shared some with you before we started recording. And it made such positive changes for us that completely changed the trajectory of our children's lives for the better. So I have to be thankful for that encounter just from that standpoint alone, beyond what I'm doing now within experiencers, the very personal impact of it. I couldn't thank the universe enough for putting me through that and waking me up and leading us to much better days.
Thank you so much. I don't know if there's a better way to end this. This is just a powerful, uplifting way to conclude a conversation that began with such a heavy opening with, your own passing and then the black void.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, Mike. I consider you a good friend, and I appreciate you having me out on here. And anytime, I'd be happy to join you again. And we have so much more to discuss.
Oh, I was going to say that we could go on and on and on, but for now, because we're not going to be able to top this, how it just ended here. So, here's the question you're supposed to ask at the end of a podcast. How do people get in touch with you?
Well, if people would like to get in touch with me, they can find me through internationalufobureau.com. The CEO, we've just recently restarted it, which it was started back in 1957 by Hayden Hughes. And we've here within the last few months, we've resurrected it. And we've already got so many people jumping on board to get this thing going again. And we're looking at the phenomena with a wide open lens. And so it's really an exciting new day with what we're doing and how we're looking at the phenomena as a whole, be it UFOs, near-death experiences, non-human intelligence, just the whole gamut, and seeing how they are relating to each other and how things may have changed from hundreds of years ago. We have indigenous reports that are part of our database that were traditional stories. We're working with the Navajo Rangers and UAP PD. We've got wonderful people on our team. So I'd encourage your listeners to go in, check out International UFO Bureau, subscribe, and if they hit contact, that'll come straight to me, and I'll be happy to talk with them.
And then I'm going to once again praise your book. It's a short little book compared to some big fat books out there. And when I'm all for the short books, there's people out there writing these books about their experiences that are easy and unintimidating. And this year's book was short, but had a wealth of stories in a story arc that I did not expect opening it up. Even though I had talked to you at great length about your experiences, the story that emerged in the book was much richer than you can have, even over a many-hour conversation.
Yeah.
So I'll I'm going to encourage folks just to reach out and get this book. Is the book available as a Kindle?
It's on Amazon and pretty much any bookstore.
You gonna read an audiobook?
I bought the stuff to make an audiobook, and now I've been all busy on the bureau stuff, so I haven't had time yet.
Okay. Oh, good. If you need a hand, I've made every mistake imaginable doing an audiobook, so I learned my lessons.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'll have to reach out and take you up on that because I've had several ask me to do it. But yeah, the book is called Dying to Meet Them, One Woman's Incredible Journey from NDE to UAP. And yeah, they can get it through my website at mindytautfest.com or on Amazon.
Great. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye now. This is Mike chiming in after the editing. During the show, I asked Mindy, have you ever seen a UFO? And she kind of said, well, not really, but then followed up with an account that happened on a boat in the Gulf of Mexico. And she was cautious to say that these were only unidentified lights in the night sky. Now, I wanted to talk about an account from her book, but the conversation just kind of rolled along and we never got back to this. So after we said goodbye at the end of the recording, we talked for a little bit longer, and none of this was recorded. But we did talk about the story from the book, and that was the one that I wanted to bring up and address during the show. And it's interesting. I'm going to tell it here briefly. She attended a skywatch. She had been invited by someone she knew from a MUFON case, and he was known for his ability to seemingly call down UFOs. This happened on native land, the Osage National Reservation land in Oklahoma. There was a small group of people, and all of them were hanging out on a clear night, and as it was nearing midnight, they were all getting ready to leave. They had seen a few things that may have been satellites, but as they were getting ready to leave, the conversation turned to the connection between birds and UFOs. Now, this is something I'm very familiar with, and they all swapped stories about redbirds, owls, blackbirds, and cranes. And at this point, someone exclaimed, "A pterodactyl!" And they all looked up and they saw a big sandhill crane. It flew low right over them. And I lived out west. I've seen a lot of sandhill cranes, and wow, they sure do look like flying dinosaurs. Okay, this thing flew about 10 feet over their heads. And Mindy said its wingspan seemed close to 7 feet wide. And she said it was so vivid that she could see the fine details of its feathers. And then it glided past them, and as it was flying away, it just sort of blinked out of existence, just and gone. And they were all completely astonished, and everyone there sort of waited a little bit, like, is this thing going to reappear? And it never did. And then they all wondered if this was some sort of spirit being. Now, I read this, and I heard her tell it to me, and for me, this has the feel of a UFO event. Obviously, they were looking at what appeared to be a really big sandhill crane, but it has that kind of paranormal UFO feel. And this was the story I really wanted her to tell during the show. Now, during the show, we implied some things in the interview that were covered in her book. We couldn't get to them. The nature of a conversation, obviously things get left out. But in her book, Mindy has had a lot of other experiences, and I'm just going to list the sort of paranormal things that had been in her life leading up to her near-death experience and that continued on after. These include seeing orbs, seeing shadow beings in her home. This includes the Hat Man, and also she's been at the receiving end of powerful synchronicities, vivid dreams, prophetic dreams, and moments of psychic knowing. She also has experiences with ghosts and haunted house type things, which was a very touching part of her book, the very kindly presence of her dead grandfather. She's also had poltergeist experiences and had the streetlight thing, which is a weird thing that nobody talks about much, but she's had that streetlight thing. Okay, now we also talked about another thing. We talked about it briefly during the show. She is now part of the leadership team for the Hayden C. Hughes International UFO Bureau, And this is a reporting site that began in 1957. And there is almost 70 years of documentation that is now getting digitized. And there are plans to do statistical analysis of this information. So this is great. Here's a wealth of information that could have been easily lost. So it's a really wonderful thing that this information and all this data is getting resurrected. Now, the information about the International UFO Bureau is on Mindy's site, and there are links in the show notes. Okay, I'm going to change tempo here a little bit. Mindy and I spoke for about 20 minutes before I started to record the interview, and she said a few things that are not included in the show. And these are the kinds of things I hear quite often, and they involve people who have asked to keep their stories private. And anyone in this field knows what this means. And I need to do this too. I have a handful of my own stories that I'm not sharing simply because they involve other people who have asked me not to share them. What I can say is there is more to Mindy's experiences than what we shared in our conversation. And there is a grace and power in what was left unsaid. Now, moving on to a different, more personal topic. It has been over a month since my last podcast. When I restarted this show, I said I would do at least 2 shows a month, but I haven't quite kept up with that. But when I restarted this podcast, I made it very clear that I was not going to put pressure on myself to crank out shows, and I haven't. I have absolutely no interest in doing a weekly show, and 2 a month seemed about right. Now, this winter has, for me, it has generated a sort of mood of procrastination. Now, I have gotten plenty of other things done, but I was avoiding the podcast. I'm only one person, and I need to be gentle with myself. What I can say, like with total conviction, is that I love talking with my guests. And moving forward, I will do my best to be more consistent as winter turns to spring. I've talked a lot about my conviction not to put commercials or advertisements on this show, and I feel very strongly about that. What I am going to do is put a sort of radio commercial up, and this is for my own books. But I will do this after I give my little bye now at the close of the show. You'll get a little bit of silence, and then I'll add that advertisement for my books. And then after that, I'll include some sort of workaday updates. And I put this on at the end of the show very much on purpose. You have no obligation to listen to this after I say goodbye. So what I truly want to say and feel a need to say, and this is welling up from right inside me, this is real, I want to thank everyone, all the people who have been so supportive of me on this very strange journey of mine, this very public odyssey of stories. Peace and strength, and thank you so very much. Bye now. Owls are somehow connected to UFOs. I don't say that lightly. After over a decade of obsessive investigation, I am convinced of this connection. As strange as it may seem, people are seeing owls in the highly charged moments of a UFO sighting, and within the challenging memories of UFO abduction. This mystery has been the focus of my research. My name is Mike Cleland, and I have explored these connections in my book, The Messengers. At its core, this book is simply a collection of stories, and each is a remarkable real-life experience. The Messengers is also my own story of how owls played a role in my life. It's an exploration into the deeply personal questions that arose from my own contact experiences. Whitley Strieber said this about The Messengers.
It's a wonderful book because it's a book that advances us in consciousness. It advances us. It takes us from where we were before we started reading it to a new place in terms of understanding the close encounter experience. I can name just on the fingers of one hand the number of books that actually do that.
The Messengers is the first in a trilogy of books, and each volume explores a deeper aspect of the UFO mystery. Stories from the Messengers, owls, UFOs, and a deeper reality. This is the second in the series, and it tells a series of 19 real-life stories, each with UFOs and owls. The third is Hidden Experience, a memoir of owls, synchronicity, and UFO contact. This is my own story, my emotional journey of coming to terms with very challenging memories and experiences. All my books are available on Amazon in paperback, ebook, and very soon as audiobooks. It's me. I'm back. If I have any sort of a mission statement for this podcast, it's this. There won't be any ads on this show. But the exception is promoting my own work. You clearly just heard an advertisement for my book, The Messengers. So there's that. Also, I have a Patreon site where quite a bit of content is totally open to non-paying members. I feel this information is too important to keep behind a paywall, and I want these shows out there. I want them to be easy to find and easy to listen to. I do offer a few extras for paying members on the Patreon site, and I plan on doing more very soon. These will include some group Zoom chats and more audio extras. If you want to help support this podcast, you could join the Patreon site or use Buy Me a Coffee. That's a sort of online tip jar, and you can find it by searching buymeacoffee/Mike Cleland. Another thing that would help support my work would be to rate or review my books on Amazon or Audible. We are in a totally new era, and self-published authors depend on these ratings and reviews. And the same goes for rating or reviewing the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And I would be enormously appreciative if you shared my work, whether that's stuff about the books or the podcasts, on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, although I'm not very savvy on any of these sites. Okay, enough of all this. Signing off again. Peace and strength, and thank you so much. Bye now.